On August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast, bringing widespread flooding and catastrophic damage to the area. It significantly affected Norfolk Southern's railroad operations, flooding a number of facilities and damaging signals, microwave communication towers, and washing away track. On our Lake Pontchartrain Bridge, which is a vital link to Western carriers and major distribution centers, nearly all the track was destroyed. It was imperative that we restore our system quickly. This is the story of how Norfolk Southern people responded and restored service safely, efficiently, and much faster than anyone imagined could be done. It's a story of how Norfolk Southern people use hard work combined with innovative thinking to produce extraordinary results.
Response begins on a storm like this before the storm ever hits.
Of course, in the case of Katrina, we were watching it for over a week as it crossed across the southern tip of Florida and made its way into the Gulf.
We track the weather and we know that we're going to have a problem.
In this particular case, both New Orleans and Mobile, those two areas where the equipment was evacuated and moved to high ground.
We began storing materials, setting them aside, getting people ready, getting a detailed response plan put together.
We actually instituted a command center, if you will, here on the 9th floor in our building here in Atlanta.
The command center coordinated activities, mobilizing people and equipment to be ready. The transportation network rerouted traffic from New Orleans through other gateways, including Memphis and St. Louis. By Friday, August 26th, Norfolk Southern urged close to 400 employees in the potential strike zone to evacuate.
I've seen homes destroyed, I've seen lives destroyed, I've seen bodies, I've seen everything. I've seen the worst of the worst.
The rail, ballast rock, the ties, everything blown off the bridge, rail twisted as ribbon, an amazing amount of devastation.
The storm gates had closed, the floodgates had closed in New Orleans on Saturday. So we had everything moved out of New Orleans and Mobile prior to Saturday. And the storm actually hit Monday morning.
Landfall occurred at 7:10 a.m. Monday, August 29th. When it was safe to do so, Norfolk Southern assessed the damage. Nearly 3.5 miles of track were washed out. 6.3 miles of track were underwater, and another 14.8 miles of track needed repairs. Signals and communication systems were inoperable. Power lines were down. Trees and debris covered rail lines. Restoration began immediately. Norfolk Southern embargoed all shipments south of Meridian, Mississippi to New Orleans and between Marion Junction and Mobile, Alabama. The company rerouted customers' freight to other interchange points. Following the storm, New Orleans looked like a ghost town.
There were only 3 places where I saw any activity at all. The first was that there were a lot of helicopters in the air flying around New Orleans, and you could see some boats out in the water as well. The second was there were a couple of cranes on barges working in the industrial canal to repair some levee breaks. And the third was this army of Norfolk Southern people and machinery working to restore the railroad. And I've told a lot of people it was a sight that really gave me a lot of pride, and I think should give anyone who works for our company a lot of pride in the way that we responded to the aftermath of the storm.
A small army of Norfolk Southern engineers, machine operators, and contractors banded together. Although many were dealing with losses of their homes and other personal property, they worked to restore rail service while living in a portable camp trailer compound.
Approximately right now we are housing 150 individuals, which mostly are maintenance away people. We are also right now housing some of the T&E people because there's no location, the hotels for them to stay out in the Slidell and New Orleans area.
So it progressively grew from an effort to house approximately 50 people up to an effort to house 400 people. And we had to move that from Meridian on down to Hattiesburg, then Hattiesburg to Nicholson, Mississippi, which is just outside of New Orleans, where we did a major portion of our work. And we had to provide everything from food, water, ice, gasoline, diesel fuel. We even had our own vehicle tire repair shop because there was so much debris on the roads. We kept getting flat tires. There was no place open to repair tires, so we even had to have our own mechanics down there to repair tires. We had to do everything and be totally self-contained.
With the circumstances being what they were in that region, when you mobilized, you didn't just mobilize people and equipment, you had to bring the entire infrastructure with you. Norfolk Southern was running gasoline and diesel fuel to supply our contractors, because the contractors had no way of getting fuel down there for their trucks, their equipment. The only way you could get fuel in that area was bring it yourself. The only way you could eat in that area was bring your own food and cook it. The only way you could find a place to stay was bring it yourself. And Norfolk Southern did all that.
Camp life here starts with a breakfast at 5 a.m. Central Standard Time, at which time we report to duty at 6 a.m. Following the job briefing and safety speech, we enter our work stations and return to work down at whatever location that might be.
Over the next few days, Norfolk Southern teams inspected 1,400 miles of track, removed 5,500 trees from rail lines, installed 11,000 railroad ties, unloaded 71,000 tons of ballast, put down 2,400 tons of stabilizing rock, and laid 27 track panels to restore damaged bridges and rail lines to service.
We had, of course, total devastation in the New Orleans area, and what wasn't underwater was basically destroyed. There were numerous power lines down across the tracks, trees down across the tracks, debris everywhere. The debris was full of snakes that had crawled up out of the swamps, and we had to be very careful about that. We had to be careful about the health hazards of getting in the polluted water that was standing everywhere. We had to be careful about the safety of the breakdown of law and order in the New Orleans area, so we had to have police accompaniment from Norfolk Southern police officers around the clock as we worked. We had to put up with things that most people take for granted, such as the not having drinking water available, not having food available, not having basic transportation in many areas. The smell that had to be tolerated was very intense at times. There was the problem of numerous homeless people seeking shelter and assistance of some sort. There was the problems of even stray animals that were roaming around the streets, hungry, looking for shelter, food, and some of them were getting a little bit testy. So we really had to be on our toes all the time for numerous different circumstances that we just don't normally encounter. And you had to plan for every little contingency, because if it could happen, it did in this environment.
Rapidly, you learned that it was just impossible to communicate with anyone in the New Orleans area, even our own people. It was extremely difficult just to communicate, to get good information about it, exactly how it existed. Cell phones didn't work, land phones didn't work. They would have to leave and get to places where you could even communicate with them.
While we were restoring the bridge, we were also working on the ground track, and while we were working on the ground track, we were also repairing washouts. We had approximately 3.5 miles of track washed out. We had over 14 miles of disturbed track, plus the 4.7 miles of track that was in the lake. We had to do all these jobs at the same time under extreme circumstances. With no basic services available, we had to provide our own services. So we were not only a railroad engineering company at the time, we were also logistics company. We're a supply company. We had to be everything at one time. And it was challenging enough to do the engineering work. But to do something that required efforts far above than what we normally do made it extremely hard.
Engineering forces worked around the clock to restore signals, microwave communication sites, and highway rail grade crossing warning devices. Of the 300 communications and signals installations that had lost power, most continued operating on standby batteries that had to be periodically charged with portable generators.
Picked up some big generators, and then I went to the Charlotte shop and picked up an anchor machine. I came down here with them and unloaded them in Seidel, Louisiana. And after that, I headed back for home and got called in Chattanooga and headed up to Columbus and picked up the TS-15 tie gang and brought them down here, and we've just been jumping from one spot to the next.
We discovered that our code lines were still buried in the ground down to Slidell, so we moved in a mobile command center. Our CNS department was able to hook up computers, telephones, fax machines, and a radio base station within hours of moving in the command center. That way we were able to communicate with Atlanta. Atlanta was able to coordinate all of our efforts as far as providing what we needed, getting more people in, getting in more supplies to handle everything we needed to handle.
Can we do a quick roll call, please?
Jack Phelps, Alabama Division.
Steve Nichols. Ed Hopper.
We had a extensive plan put into place because of the severity of the storm that we saw. We've actually begun planning and removal of our equipment on Friday ahead of the storm itself. We had our command center in place by Saturday morning here in Atlanta, which consisted of all different departments to be ready to talk to other carriers and customers for their needs and to be sure our employees were safe.
I heard from Gary a little bit earlier the water has not gone down any at the Oliver Junction?
Not at Oliver Junction. The freeway has gone down at Chalmette. The office building at Chalmette's dry now.
Once the levees breached, we did have the water rise in that particular area and flooded our yard down there, Oliver Yard, and also a portion of what's known as the back belt, which is the track where our connections are to the foreign lines that we interchange with in New Orleans.
Okay, Jackie Phelps, you going to walk us through the Alabama?
All right, sir. We don't have any big problems right now. Memphis Gateway flowed real good today. We've got en route. We've got about 4 trains over there.
We had to reroute a lot of traffic. New Orleans is a primary gateway to the west. We interchange with the Union Pacific, the BNSF, the Canadian National, the KCS, and also the CSX. In addition, a switching carrier, the New Orleans Public Belt Railroad, all through that gateway. All that was disrupted, so we had to put together a new plan to reroute that traffic.
Amid all this damage, perhaps the most amazing evidence of Katrina's fury and force was on Norfolk Southern's railroad bridge over Lake Pontchartrain. For more than 100 years, the railroad trestle had served as a transportation link connecting the Gulf Coast with industries in the north. In 1997, Norfolk Southern replaced the historic timber trestle with a state-of-the-art concrete structure. It was engineered for strength and stability. One of the longest railroad bridges in the world, it spans the lake for nearly 6 miles. More than 180 million pounds of concrete and 102 miles of steel went into its construction. But although it took Norfolk Southern 13 years to build the Lake Pontchartrain trestle, it took Katrina less than a single day to take it out of service. The storm surge literally swept more than 4.5 miles of heavy mainline steel track off the concrete deck and into the lake, together with cross ties and tons of rock ballast.
Total disaster, just debris, confused people, just the worst state of anything that you can imagine.
Huge, miles and miles of rail just disappeared.
In Katrina's wake, the railroad trestle looked like a paved highway.
on Lake Pontchartrain that the track for the north mile of the bridge had lost all its ballast, and for the south 4.8 miles the track had lost all the ballast, plus it was off the bridge in the lake, and that parts of 2 spans of the bridge were also in the lake.
Faced with this challenge, Norfolk Southern developed an innovative and unusual plan to repair the bridge.